I want you to imagine that you've come over from a foreign country to a place where you don't speak the language, and it's your wedding day. One of the most magical days in a woman's life, and your groom is a man you've only met a handful of times. But he is the King of England, which means you will be England's new queen. It sounds like a fairy tale, doesn't it? With equal amounts of uncertainty and fantasy. That feeling you have is probably how Anna of Cleves felt on her wedding day. Except, this wasn't a fairy tale. This was real life. It's the 7th of January 1540, the morning after King Henry VIII and Anne of Cleves' wedding day. Most couples would be enjoying their first day of wedded bliss, and Anne should be enjoying being able to fully embrace her new role as the Queen of England. Well, this is not how this story goes. Henry did not hold back his displeasure for his new wife, telling Thomas Cromwell how he found Anne even more abhorrent than when he first met her. I liked her before not well, but now I like her much worse. Henry went on to claim, she is nothing fair and have very evil smells about her. Also, despite him claiming he did not like her when they first met, there is no real evidence to suggest that Henry disliked his wife. If you need a reminder of their encounter, watch part 1. He did, however, seem very stung about Anne's faux pas during his chivalric games. He also confided to a manservant that his bride was indisposed to excite and provoke any lust in him, and he could never be stirred to know her carnally. So basically, they were unable to consummate their marriage and legalise their union, and he left her as good a maid as I found her. As much as Henry wants to blame this on Anne, and him being repulsed by her appearance, let's be real, she wasn't the real reason the marriage wasn't consummated.
True. It's all true.
Tracy Borman suggests that it is at least equally possible that he was impotent. He was nearly twice his young bride's age, and had become increasingly immobile in his recent years. There had been no talk of a mistress for some time. Obviously, this was not information that any man would want to be made public, let alone the king. Kings prided themselves on their sexual potency. Why do you think their codpieces take centre stage in their portraits? Victoria Bartels talks about the use of codpieces and their link to masculinity in Europe in her article on the University of Cambridge website. Quote, masculinity was big in 16th century Europe, along with notions of chivalry, honour and romance. Codpieces were speedily hijacked for the purpose of proving masculinity in the most blatant manners. The most elaborate versions were singularly showy, and portraits show that in the mid-16th century, the codpiece reached epic proportions. Henry also boasted to his doctor, Dr. Butts, that although he could not bring himself to have sex with Anne, he did have 2 wet dreams.
Whoop-de-doo!
Okay, so that's how Henry feels about the match, but what about Anne? Well, for her part, she seemed to have enjoyed married life. However, we will never know what happened behind closed doors, and don't forget, Anne may very well have been playing her role. It is often asserted that when the marriage was in its early days, Anne confided to her senior attendants, which included Lady Rochford, Lady Edgecombe, and Lady Rutland, that she believed she might be pregnant, telling them, when he comes to bed he kisses me, and taketh me by the hand, and biddeth me good night, sweetheart, and in the morning kisses me, and biddeth me farewell, darling. After some awkward glances, they wished that the Queen was with child soon, to which Anne informed them that she knew she was with child. Lady Edgecombe cautiously said, I think your Grace is a maid still, to which Anne supposedly laughed and said, how can I be a maid and sleep every night with the king? Is this not enough? To which Lady Rutland is supposed to have retorted, Madam, there must be more than this, or it be long ere we have a Duke of York. And then they apparently enlightened her on what was needed for conception. However, I don't know how much of this I actually believe, and I don't think that Anne was this naive or misinformed in how baby making was made, as she spent her childhood growing up in the Frauenzimmer, where she and her sisters would have been surrounded by pregnant women who had had children, and potentially even exposed to childbirth. Although I do find believable that maybe they didn't go into detail about conception, which may explain for her misunderstanding, there were midwives present within the Frauenzimmer. So given that she was in this environment, there is no reason to think that she did not understand the purpose of a noble marriage and how to produce children. Could this be propaganda made to help ruin Anne's credibility, to help make the annulment easier? A tournament was held on the 11th of January in honour of the new marriage, and Anne, rather quickly, dropped her German fashion. This would be the first time that she appeared in public in an English gown with a French hood, and yet, despite the public's approval of her new dress sense, it failed to have any effect on her husband. This was still prevalent 3 days later when Cromwell informed the council that the royal couple had not yet consummated their marriage, as the king liked not her body and could not be provoked or stirred to that act, though able to do the act with other than her. Anne may not have won over the king, but the same could not be said about his daughters. The 6-year-old Lady Elizabeth wrote from Hertford Castle, requesting to come to court as she was eager to meet her new stepmother. Permit me to show by this billet the zeal with which I devote my respect to you as Queen, and my entire obedience to you as my mother. I am too young and feeble to have power to do more than felicitate you with all my heart in this commencement of your marriage. I hope that your Majesty will have as much goodwill for me as I have zeal for your service. Anne was touched by Elizabeth's sentiment and asked her husband if his youngest daughter could come to court. However, Henry would not hear of it, and their relationship was not strong enough for Anne to have any influence. Henry took the letter and gave it to Cromwell. He then, rather harshly, ordered Cromwell to tell Elizabeth that she had a mother so different from this woman that she ought not to wish to see her.
Gonna need a sensu for that one.
By the end of January, Henry had dismissed most of Anne's German attendants and sent them back to Cleves, and plans had been made for a February coronation for Anne, with the traditional state entry into London to take place at the end of January. However, Henry had abandoned these plans without telling his poor wife why. Instead, a civil reception took place.
This is awkward.
By March of 1540, Henry and Anne still hadn't consummated the marriage, and now he was looking for a way out like he had with Catherine of Aragon. Interestingly enough, the first mention of Henry's courtship of Catherine Howard is a month later in the April, so he may have already clocked her and interacted with her in the March, when he's wanting an annulment.
Coincidence? I think not!
Henry claims that he could not consummate his marriage as he felt he wasn't entitled to do so because of the previous arrangement Anne had with the Duke of Lorraine's son. The council agreed that the marriage not being consummated was enough alone for an annulment, without having to drag up the pre-contract. In May 1540, the King and Queen appeared at jousts and banquets that were held to celebrate the May Day holiday. However, much to the concern of Thomas Cromwell, Henry continued to complain about Anne, saying she was waxed, wilful and stubborn with him, and it appeared that the couple were no better acquainted than before. In Anne's defence, she could have had anxiety or felt neglected by her husband, which may have explained her demeanour towards him. Cromwell warned Anne to not antagonise the king. Anne was not aware that she had offended the king. On the 10th of June 1540, Thomas Cromwell entered the council chambers, but before he could sit down, Thomas Howard, the Duke of Norfolk, arrested Cromwell in the name of the king. A bill of attainder was drawn up against him and given to Parliament, with the charges of both treason and heresy. Cromwell was transported by barge to the Tower of London. 9 days later, the bill of attainder received the approval of the Upper House and was sent down to the House of Commons. Henry's ducks were slowly getting themselves in a row. He had found a replacement queen who he found attractive. He has a solid reason to annul the marriage. He's about to get justice against the man who arranged this disastrous fourth marriage, and now he just had to do something about his unwanted queen. On the 24th of June, Henry sent Anne to the Palace of Richmond. His excuse was because there was plague in London, and he told Anne that he would join her in the country air in 2 days. Yeah, he didn't. The French ambassador, Charles de Marillac, heard talk of love and a new affection for another lady. While Anne was out of the picture, Henry would openly travel to visit his new lady, Catherine Howard, at Lambeth Palace, and they would dine at Bishop Gardiner's palace in Southwark. On the 3rd of July, Cromwell realised that he was in trouble and sent Henry a letter pleading for his life, which ended with, "Most gracious prince, I cry for mercy, mercy, mercy." But his pleas fell on deaf ears. A few days later, the Privy Council made its way to Richmond Palace to see the Queen and asked for her consent for the idea of an annulment. Henry had decided to make generous financial provisions for Anne to increase his chances of her cooperating, which would ultimately make his life easier. Part of this provision included Richmond Palace, Bletchley Manor, Hever Castle, £4,000 per year, or £1,685,428.80 in 2017 money. She was also allowed to keep her royal jewels, plate and goods in order to furnish her new properties. Henry assured the clergy that was appointed to investigate his marriage in a written declaration that he had no ulterior motive in seeking a divorce.
Right.
Yeah, okay. He claims that when the marriage had been proposed, he was in favour, because I heard so much both of her excellent beauty and virtuous behaviour. But when he met her, he liked her so ill that I was woe that ever she came into England, and deliberated with myself that, if it were possible to find some means to break off, I would never enter yoke with her. King Henry VIII and Anne of Cleves' marriage was declared to be null and void by Parliament on the 9th of July, 1540. Members of the Privy Council informed the now ex-Queen of England at Richmond Palace of the annulment of her marriage, and that she was to now refer to herself as the King's sister, an honorary title that the King had given to her as thanks for her cooperation in the annulment. The world also knew that Anne was still a virgin, so, if she wished to remarry, Henry had actually made it easy for her, which was actually quite considerate of him. It is often asserted that Anne fainted at the news. She didn't, but she must have felt some sort of considerable relief, knowing that she was not to follow the same fate as her predecessor Anne Boleyn. Dr. Wotton was sent to Cleves on the order of the King to inform Anne's brother Wilhelm. Anne had also told Dr. Wotton to inform her brother that she would be remaining in England, as she liked England, and probably the freedom it offered compared to Cleves. Wilhelm took the news fairly okay, commenting he was glad his sister had fared no worse. However, he was concerned that Anne might be persecuted for her faith if she stayed in England. She wouldn't be, but I think it's cute that her brother cares. King Francis I and Emperor Charles V also approved of the annulment. Funny that, seeing as the whole point of the marriage, or maybe better worded alliance, was to provide England with an ally against France and Spain. The Privy Council requested that the Lady Anne wrote a letter to the King, formally acknowledging the annulment of their marriage, which she did on the 11th of July. In the letter she accepted and approved the decision of the clergy, that your highness will take me for your sister, for the which I most humbly thank you accordingly, and she signed the letter, Your Majesty's humble sister and servant, Anne, the daughter of Cleves. Her rank as the king's sister now meant that she took precedence over all of the ladies of the kingdom, with a few exceptions, such as Henry's next wife and queen, and the king's daughters. She would also always have a place reserved for her at court. The marriage was formally annulled by a specially introduced Act of Parliament on the 12th of July, 1540. And that's where I'm going to leave today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe. And if you really enjoyed it, why not leave a super thanks? It's incredibly hard to juggle running this YouTube channel and holding down a full-time job at the same time. But until the next time, have a wonderful day.